Good morning, or afternoon, or middle of the night. Whenever you're joining us, welcome to online worship at the Unitarian Church of Los Alamos. I'm Ann Marsh, Worship Associate. Our minister, the Reverend John Cullinan, has the day off, and I'm delighted to introduce our pulpit guest, Susannah Sudborough. Susannah will tell you more about herself in her sermon, so I'll just say that she's a Boston-based journalist who has worked for several area newspapers and TV stations. Today, she will share some of the life lessons she's learned covering the COVID-19 pandemic. She'll also share her lovely singing voice with us during the anthem. Susannah has a special place in my heart, for I have known her since she was born. She grew up in the Unitarian Universalist Church of Canton, New York, where Wade Wheelock and I were co-ministers. Her parents, Nelly Case and Stephen Ledoux, are members here of our Los Alamos church, and her birth father, Ned Sudborough, was a Santa Fe UU before his passing. So New Mexico is like a second home for her. Welcome, Susannah. As Unitarian Universalists, we honor the inherent worth and dignity of every person and the interdependence of all life. We come together to learn from each other, to draw inspiration from many sources, and to work together to build communities of greater justice and compassion. Whoever you are, whomever you love, wherever you are on your journey, you are welcome right here. If you're watching on Sunday morning, we invite you to join our Zoom coffee hour after the service at 11. For other opportunities to connect during the week, check our Facebook pages, email announcements, and our website. Whether you're visiting us for the first time or have been part of this congregation for many years, may this time set apart call us back to our highest ideals and our deepest commitments. Welcome. As we light our chalice in our sanctuary and in our hearts, we affirm that new light is ever waiting to break through to guide our ways, that new truth is ever waiting to break through to illumine our minds, and that new love is ever waiting to break through to warm our hearts. I invite you to join me in speaking the words of our affirmation. Love is the doctrine of this church. The quest for truth is its sacrament, and service is its prayer. To dwell together in peace, to seek knowledge in freedom, to serve life in fellowship, to the end that all souls shall grow in harmony. Thus do we covenant with each and with all. From the events of our lives come the songs of our hearts, songs of joy and sorrow, of loss and love, of fear and of hope. Today, candles are lit in our virtual book of joys and sorrows in memory of Supreme Court Justice Ruth Bader Ginsburg, who was an advocate of equal rights for all and for the integrity of democracy. She will be missed. May we honor her memory by continuing the fight for equality. May all our joys and sorrows, whether spoken aloud or whispered into the wind, be enfolded in the love of this community, and may that love ripple outward in ever-widening circles. In that spirit, let us join our hearts in a time of shared silence. In this time of national trauma and personal struggles, our anger, fear, and grief are all too real. And this past week, the fight just got harder. But although principalities and powers tell us to give up, we're still here. Our hearts may be broken, but we're still here. Our bodies and spirits are weary, but we're still here. And in the words of Dennis Hamilton, there is time yet to tell our loved ones we love them. There is time yet to tell those we have wronged that we are sorry. There is time yet to look upward to the soaring clouds, to follow the flight of birds, to trace the sun's path into the evening trees. There is time yet to extend a hand, time yet to extend a heart. There is time yet to sing blues for the pain, and alleluia for the praise. Time yet to plan and to build and to plot a conspiracy of love. There is time yet to bring our sorrow to a place of healing and to take one more step toward justice. Regardless of our faults and failings, larger than our dreams or needs or faith, this day presents itself to us, a gift. May we bless it and cherish it and live it in gratitude and wonder. So may it be. Amen and shalom.
This is a story of Orpheus and Eurydice. Later on, I will be singing an excerpt from the musical Hadestown, which is an adaptation of this original Greek myth. So I thought it would be fitting to tell the story, which is sad, as you will see, but I think it does inspire hope in a weird way. There's only been one mortal whose skill at playing the lyre compared with the god of music, Golden Apollo. And that mortal's name was Orpheus. When he played, the birds would swoop down from the heavens and sit on the branches above his head. Now Orpheus had fallen in love with a woman called Eurydice. There was a wedding, a magnificent wedding. But all through the wedding ceremony, the candles and the lamps in the temple gave off an oily black smoke so that the guests coughed and choked. Even the priests had to wipe tears from their eyes. They looked at one another and shook their heads. This is a bad omen. Such things should never happen at a wedding. And the priests were right to be worried. The very next morning, Eurydice woke up early. She climbed out of the bed where Orpheus was still deep in sleep. She pulled on her clothes and went out walking. The dawn was breaking. A snake that was coiled up on a rock woke up. It slid through the grass just as Eurydice was walking barefoot across the meadow. Their paths crossed. It sunk its fangs into her ankle. Its poison coursed through her veins. With a cry, she fell to the ground. When Orpheus found her, she was lying dead and cold. He lifted her in his arms. He carried her home, his face wet with tears. When the funeral was finished, when the pyre had burned and the heat of the fire's heart had consumed the house of bone, Orpheus picked up his lyre and set off on a great journey. He traveled over land and sea until he came to a dark cave. He made his way through tunnels that wound to the left and right. He delved into darkness. At last he came to the edge of an oily black river, the river of forgetfulness. On the far side of it, he could see the shadowy hills of the country he was seeking. He was looking across towards the land of the dead. Orpheus stared over the water, with only the thought of Eurydice in his mind. How could his lovely bride be there in that strange dark place? Suddenly there came the sound of growling, and then a harsh barking. Out of the shadows, the great three-headed dog Cerberus, who guards the riverbank, leapt at Orpheus, his lips curled back from his teeth. Orpheus lifted his lyre to his shoulders and began to play. And such was the beauty of his music that the monstrous dog stopped in his tracks, wagged his tail, closed his 6 red eyes, and rolled onto his back and howled with his 3 heads. The beauty of the music floated out across the water and reached the ears of Charon, the ferryman. He pulled his boat towards the sound. Orpheus never stopped playing his lyre. He stepped back from the bank into the boat, and the ancient ferryman pushed away from the land and pulled his boat across the river. When they reached the far side, Orpheus, still playing, jumped from the boat and walked into the shadows. Soon there was a whispering around him, a rustling, a shuffling, like the sound of the wind blowing through the dead leaves. The dead were gathering. They followed him. They were enchanted by his music. It made them weep for sorrows they could not remember anymore. It made them laugh for joys that were forgotten. For the dead have lost all memory of their lives. They're a drifting host of whispering ghosts. On and on Orpheus walked, surrounded by the dead, and then he saw a palace loom out of the shadows. As he approached it, the dead fell back. He found that he was walking alone. He was approaching the dwelling place of their king. He made his way between the black gates. He climbed steps of black stone. A doorway of black ebony swung open before him. He entered the hall. At the far end of it, there were 2 thrones. One sat the king of terrors, Hades himself. His eyes as deep as open graves, his black beard spread across his belly. Beside Hades sat his wife, beautiful Persephone. She was like a moon shining in a dark sky. like a mistletoe berry in the depths of winter. Orpheus, still playing his lyre, walked up to the two thrones. He stood before the god and the goddess. He looked into their faces, and then he began to sing. We mortals are wretched things, and the gods who know no care have woven sorrow into the patterns of our lives. Even the sparrow on the branch, even the wren in the willows knows more of sorrow than the thundering gods who have never felt the cold hand of death around their hearts. But you mighty gods, you have known the sweet pains of love. You have felt Aphrodite's shining shafts. Great Hades, imagine those summer months when Persephone is gone, lasting forever. Imagine, if you can, her pale face crumbling into dust. That is how it is for mortal man. Great Hades, I beg you, give me back my Eurydice. There was a silence. Then Persephone turned to Hades, her face streaming with silver tears, and Hades turned to his wife. One oily black tear trickled down his cheek and splashed onto his beard. He drew his breath and spoke. Fetch me the three fates. The three ancient sisters were brought before him. The first who spins out the thread of a life, the second who measures its length, and the third who cuts it. Hades looked into the wrinkled, leathery face of the third sister. Find the cut thread of Eurydice's life and mend it. The third sister bowed before the god. Hades turned to Orpheus. Now go. Leave my palace, leave my realm, and she will follow you. But do not look behind you. Do not look over your shoulder until the light of the sun shines full upon your face. Orpheus bowed. He turned his heel and left the palace. He made his way across the shadowy kingdom until he came to the river's edge. Charon the ferryman was waiting for him. He climbed into the boat. As he sat down, he felt a tremble, as if someone had climbed in behind him. He kept his eyes fixed on the far shore. When they reached the riverbank, he stepped out of the boat, and behind him he could hear footsteps, soft footsteps following him. As he journeyed, he could sometimes hear the snap of a twig. Sometimes he thought he could feel Eurydice's breath on the back of his neck. And still he looked ahead. He made his way through the tunnel of stone, and then at last he was out of the cave and breathing the fresh air in the living world. Above him the sky was bright with shining stars. Soon, he thought to himself, soon the dawn will break and the light of the sun will shine upon my face. But as Eurydice was following Orpheus, she caught her foot on a stone, tripped, and fell. Orpheus heard her stumble, and without thinking, he turned to catch her in his arms. He tried to break her fall, and for a single moment he saw her face, pale beneath the silver stars. And then his arms closed around empty air, and she was gone. In the land of many guests, the third fate cut the thread of Eurydice's life for the second time, and this time there'd be no mending it. Orpheus turned. He ran back into the cave. He journeyed down into darkness until he came to the edge of the oily black water. He shouted her name, and there was no answer. And then the three-headed dog Cerberus came, growling and snarling and snapping at his ankles, and Charon, the ancient ferryman, cursed him and spat at him. And Orpheus knew there could be no return to the land of the dead. So he made his way back to the living world and devoted himself to his music, which was more beautiful than ever, woven through with a silver thread of sorrow. And Orpheus never saw Eurydice again. Never. At least, not in this world. But some people say that when he died, many years later, Charon the ferryman was waiting for him. He carried Orpheus over the oily black water, and as he stepped onto the bank at the far side, like all others, he forgot everything. He joined the drifting, oblivious hosts of the dead. But Persephone had seen him, and she remembered him, and she felt pity stirring in her heart. She reached forwards and touched Orpheus's forehead with the tip of her finger. And in that moment, his memory returned. And then Persephone touched Eurydice's forehead, and she too remembered everything. And the two lovers found one another in that shadowy kingdom, and they fell into one another's arms. And even to this day, some say, they walk together, talking and laughing, sometimes arm in arm. Sometimes Eurydice walks ahead of Orpheus, and he follows. And sometimes Orpheus walks ahead, knowing that he can look over his shoulder and his Eurydice will always be there.
When Orpheus looked back to help Eurydice, he lost her, at least in this life. But although he was sad beyond words, he still had his music. And over time, that music brought joy and peace to others, and perhaps to himself as well. Bad and sad things happen to all of us, and sometimes it is hard to feel hopeful. So today's intention table activity is a challenge. I invite you to take a piece of paper and write the word hope down one side like this. Then see if you can find words or phrases beginning with each of the four letters, H, O, P, E, words or phrases that are hopeful for you. You could write the words or draw pictures or both. Now, I pretended that I was Orpheus and I tried this activity. And here's what I came up with. H, helping others. O, openness to new adventures. P, poetry and music. E, Eurydice, of course. Now it's your turn. What is hopeful for you?
What I wanted was to fall asleep, close my eyes and into the shade. The one I left behind. Should you ever walk this way, come and find me lying in the bed I made.
Hi, I'm Susannah Sudborough. You might have seen me at a Christmas Eve service the last couple years, or at my brother Miles's murder mystery plays. I've been told the platinum blonde Bob is not easy to miss. Normally, I don't write about myself, but I know that any good article humanizes the subject, so here goes. I was born in Potsdam, New York on June 21st, 1994. I was lucky enough to belong to my lovely parents, Nelly Case and Stephen Ledoux, who you may know. I was even more lucky to be one of the few children brought up within the UU church. I'll never forget my wonderful childhood ministers, Marsh and Wheelock, who are now members of this church, breaking gender barriers for children early with their children's stories by having Anne always play the prince in Wade the Princess. I moved to Boston, Massachusetts when I was 18 to attend Emerson College. I originally majored in theater, but quickly switched to political communication. At the time, I decided I didn't want to be a starving artist, so I, of course, then went back to get my master's degree at Boston University at age 24 so that I could join the very lucrative journalism industry. Since then, I've worked as a web producer for 2 network TV stations in Boston and as a reporter for 4 regional newspapers. I now work as the only news reporter, and yes, I mean very literally the only reporter, at the Taunton Daily Gazette in Taunton, Massachusetts. I graduated BU in December and worked 2 part-time jobs in the spring, one at a newspaper and one at a TV station to make ends meet. At the time, January 2020 seemed like a good time to break into journalism. Plenty of routine stuff to cover: an election, the 400th anniversary of the Plymouth Colony, the 100th anniversary of women's suffrage. Well, you all know what wrench was thrown into my first industry experiences out of college. An unprecedented pandemic about which information is changing daily. Just what I wanted to cut my teeth on. Anyway, it's been an enlightening ride, to say the least. So here's 5 things I have learned about our society from covering a deadly worldwide pandemic. First off, and I say this with both confidence and humility, knowing it applies most importantly to myself, most people don't know anything about anything. It's something you learn pretty quickly in journalism. When you're forced to source all of your information and you can't rely on your assumptions, it's like being 3 years old again. You ask things like, but why? And how did it get to be like that? And what does that mean? It's humbling realizing how wrong you were about so many things, even insignificant things like how the vast majority of bees are female worker bees, or the fact that exploring dilapidated buildings is a popular hobby called urban exploration. But while this is all fascinating for me, it's not good during a deadly pandemic. People spread all kinds of misinformation about the coronavirus with no idea that it's not true. From the posts about how masks don't work, hint, they do, to it's just like the flu, hint, it's not. Misinformation is dangerous. And not all of it is anyone's fault. For instance, at first the narrative was that people shouldn't wear masks because of the shortage for healthcare workers. But then but then public health experts realized we actually should be wearing them. And then there was the belief that the coronavirus could spread on surfaces by staying there for days, which experts realized later largely wasn't the case. It was really about close contact. But even so, we say so many things that we don't actually know to be true. We say things because they're interesting, but we don't remember where we heard it. We say things because the narrative has some truth to it, but we actually heard it from a friend who's not at all an expert in the subject. All this to say, along with the coronavirus pandemic, there is a misinformation pandemic in this country. People don't know where to source reliable information. They know of media spin, but they don't know how to identify it. So they end up falling prey to their own biases and believing what feels true for them. And that's how you end up with so much of the population in one of the most educated, wealthy countries in the world not taking this pandemic seriously. Number 2, people are really kind when they think someone's suffering for no reason. I must have written at least 10 stories about people teaching themselves how to sew masks and giving them away for free. And that's just me personally. These are incredible stories. I mean, one woman who happened to be a UU was working full time and then sewing from 7 p.m. to 2 a.m. every day to make masks for people. And she wouldn't take any payment for them. If people donated money, she gave it to a local organization that helped the homeless. And this is a well-documented phenomenon. Research has found that people are extremely giving after a natural disaster. But what about the people suffering from everyday disasters like addiction, poverty, and police brutality? Why are the same people who are willing to go door to door delivering food and masks and supplies to the elderly are the same people who don't want more substance abuse treatment beds at their local hospital, even when the opiate crisis is thriving in their city? Why are the same people who donate thousands of dollars to struggling local businesses to keep them open during the shutdown are the same people who say, well, if they were shot by a cop, they must have done something wrong? Now, obviously I can't prove this, but I believe it's because our society has an artificial line between personal tragedy and personal fault. And because of this, an empathy gap is created. People see themselves in a business owner forced to lose money because of a state-mandated shutdown, but they can't imagine growing up so miserable with addiction all around you that you fall into the same negative patterns. People can imagine being scared to go outside during a deadly pandemic, so much so that you can't go get groceries, but they can't imagine how deep centuries-old prejudices can cause you to be treated differently in so many ways, both subtle and overt, simply because your skin has more melanin. One moment that stuck with me recently was when I was reporting on remote learning. I was interviewing parents, and one mother had told me this heart-wrenching story about her 19-year-old son who was struggling to graduate high school. And then, because of remote learning, he never learned what he needed to learn because the standards were so low. And then there was the fact that her family of 6, supported by a single mom and essential worker, had one laptop and a few phones to share between 3 school-aged children while her 3-year-old twins were running around. A few days later, after interviewing her, I wrote an article based on a police report about how a man was stabbed downtown. What had happened was that 4 men had shown up at a different man's house to collect money for drugs. The man they were looking for wasn't there, so they followed his girlfriend around town, and when they saw her with a friend, they assumed he was her boyfriend and attacked him. A random couple driving by pulled over to break up the fight, and the man who had pulled over got stabbed. I wrote the article up not really thinking much of it. People need to know when people are stabbed in public in their city. And we always publish the names of the accused. But after the article went online, the mother sent me pictures of her children with their names for the other article, and I recognized the name of her 19-year-old son immediately. He was one of the men accused of attacking all those people for drug money. So there his name would be in our paper. People would call him a thug, a loser, a drug addict, but Did they know that he had just graduated high school? Did they know that he had struggled for years to do so? Did they know he had to share a computer with 2 other siblings? Did they know that he had to take care of 4 younger siblings? I asked the mother if she was still comfortable with me using her children's story, given that I had just published something negative about her son without knowing the connection. I don't think I could have imagined a more mature and knowing response. "No, it's okay," she said. "They're good kids, and they don't deserve to be defined by their brother's stupid mistakes." Number 3. People say they want more happy stories, but they don't read them. I noticed very early on during the pandemic that people often complained about the news being negative. Now, that's often because the news you most need to know is bad news, but most TV stations and newspapers went out of their way to find some uplifting stories. The funny part was that the articles would usually get the most likes on Facebook and Twitter, but they would have very few page views, meaning that people just read the headline. And you know what? I think that's just fine. Maybe people just need to know that there are still good things happening in the world, even if they don't want an in-depth description. Number 4. The word essential means a lot of things. It was one of the first buzzwords that got thrown around when the pandemic hit. We found out very quickly who really made the world go round. Not CEOs, not stockbrokers, not the wealthy elite. It was grocery workers, EMTs, nurses, and firefighters. But even as so many were deemed non-essential, there were many of those whose work became more important than ever. What kept us sane during the quarantine? Well, we all know it was artistic works like books, movies, TV shows, podcasts, music, and video games. When we wouldn't have survived without them, how can they be deemed non-essential? And on that note, I'm going to ask you to consider one more essential worker that I have yet to be heard being thanked. Who kept you in the know about the virus's spread and what the symptoms were? Who kept you informed on where virus hotspots were and your state's current infection rate? Who explained new CDC and state guidelines? Who brought you stories of how the virus was being handled well or poorly? Who brought you stories of people dying preventively and surviving miraculously? Who created a window to the world you could no longer be out in through your daily paper or TV or radio or computer screen? You guessed it, us journalists. Number 5. None of our societal systems were built to withstand a pandemic. I understand why people want to reopen the country. The pandemic has made it plainly obvious that our systems are reliant on everybody continuing to work. In America, to live, you must work. And these people who want to reopen the country simply want to live. But what happens when we can't work? What happens when working means risking your life? What happens when we're forced to choose between dying from a virus and dying from poverty? We can press pause on this trolley problem temporarily, but even now, members of our government are getting antsy about giving people the benefits necessary for people to stay home. And nowhere is this systemic failure more evident than with our schools. If a parent has to go back to work, who will take care of their child if they're not in school? A daycare? Well, then why not have them back in school? If your child has special needs and can't learn remotely, are they to fall years behind? But then, of course, there's the teachers, many of which are older and at a higher risk of coronavirus complications. Add to that they teach in old buildings with broken, outdated ventilation systems that all but ensure an outbreak. So what do we sacrifice? The sanity and money of parents, the education of our children, or the lives of our teachers? In our current system, there is no other option, and there is no good option. I recently wrote an article on unemployment, and for it, I interviewed 2 academic economists. One gave me a straightforward answer that would easily fit into my article. Yes, of course the issue is the coronavirus, and the problem won't go away until the virus does, he told me. But the second economist refused to give me such an easy answer. In fact, she thought I was asking the wrong questions. She challenged me to look past the simple question of how and when we could get people working again, and to instead take a look at how easily all of our societal systems had failed the minute we all needed to stay home. This is an opportunity for us to realize that our current way of life is unsustainable, she said. And if we can get our leaders to see this, the silver lining in all this sadness is that we have a chance to rebuild these systems to last. Thanks for your time.
In this congregation, we strive to touch the centers of meaning and value within ourselves and to strengthen our hope that hand in hand and heart to heart, we can create a better world. One step toward building that world is to share our resources with the wider community. During the month of September, all our offerings will go to the Unitarian Universalist Association's Disaster Relief Fund, which provides assistance to congregations and their communities experiencing disasters such as fires and hurricanes. Please make your contributions through Givelify at the website address in the service notes or with the phone app on your screen. Thank you for your generosity. May the music of Beethoven lift your spirits, and may what you give bring you joy. This is the day we have been given. Let us rejoice and be glad in it. This is the world we have been given. Let us love its beauty and heal its pain. This is the life we have been given. Let us make of it a blessing and a benediction. Go in peace.